Hey guys. Tonight we're slipping quietly into the streets of Paris at the dawn of the 20th century. When the air itself seemed laced with secrets. Gas lamps flicker like watchful eyes along the boulevards. Their soft halos mixing with the smoke of cafes and the distant hum of carriages on cobblestones. You wander through Montmartre where laughter tumbles out of cabarets. And you could almost believe this city is the safest place in the world to dream. Except, well, heroin is beginning to make its sly debut. And trust me, you wouldn't last a week in this world without getting tangled in its web. You'd barely survive one soirée before realizing everyone has a little glass vial tucked somewhere. As casually as if it were peppermints. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing the map of our little nighttime community light up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing now at the edge of the Seine, watching its waters lap lazily against the quays, while whispers carry through the chill night air about a new, miracle medicine. People speak of heroin with the kind of reverence we usually save for saints, or maybe snake oil salesmen. Doctors in crisp coats praise it as the cleaner cousin of morphine. As though addiction could be politely brushed aside with a fresh label. The irony, of course, is thick enough to spread on bread. Heroin was first marketed as the safe alternative, a noble cure, something a mother might trust for her child's cough. Picture a jar in a pharmacy window, glass glowing under lantern light, promising relief in neat Latin script. The word itself, heroish, whispered of heroism, of strength, yet you can feel the trap already closing. You walk into one of those pharmacies. Shelves lined with bottles like soldiers waiting for orders. The air smells of camphor and chalk. But your eyes are drawn to the vials labeled with quiet authority, heroin hydrochloride. Customers drift in and out, some clutching prescriptions, others just paying a few francs for their miracle in powder form. A seamstress buys hers with trembling fingers, swearing it helps her work through the night. A factory worker smiles at the promise of numbness for his aching back. And behind the counter, the pharmacist nods politely, never questioning whether relief today means ruin tomorrow. Some historians still argue whether Parisians knew the risks so early on, or whether they were simply blinded by the sparkle of progress. After all, this was an age drunk on invention. The Eiffel Tower had only just planted itself into the skyline a decade before. And electricity was beginning to hum its way into daily life. Why not believe that science had given them a painless miracle too? You stroll deeper into Montmartre now. Past posters peeling from walls. Bright with colors announcing can shows and shadow plays. Behind those doors, artists sip absinthe while whispering about this new powder that opens the mind. Claiming it loosens the tongue of muses who had gone silent. One young painter, his hands speckled with russet pigments, insists he sees more clearly when the world blurs. Another poet scribbles furiously, convinced the rhythm of his verse flows only when his veins sing with the rush. You glance at their flushed faces and wonder if their art glows because of the drug, or in spite of it. The streets themselves seem to hum with contradiction. On one corner, A doctor declares heroin the path to health, on another. A beggar twitches in the shadows, already chained by the so-called cure. And somewhere in between, you hear laughter, half sincere, half nervous, because Paris has always known how to dress up its fears as fashion. A joke flickers in your mind. Imagine telling a Parisian back then, "Don't worry, this wonder drug will be banned in a few decades." They'd probably raise their glass and reply, "So was absinthe, mon ami. And look how that turned out." History, you realize, has always had a taste for irony. And the City of Lights has always thrived on dancing at the edge of darkness. And so, as the night deepens, you sense the stage being set. The lights glow softer. The music of cabarets floats on the air. And beneath it all, heroin slides quietly into Parisian veins. Into the art, the laughter, the very bloodstream of the city. You can almost feel it settling in, unnoticed yet impossible to uproot. Like ivy climbing the stones of an old cathedral. Vua hung sao ki fa zong jokken roy. Trong nuk tai ben, nen lo viek truyen ngoi chokan. Vua moi hoi hop hai moi hai vi quan lang kong tu lai ma bao rang. Dua nao lam vua long ta. Kuoi nam dem tran cam my vi den dang kung tien vong cho tron dao hu. Ti ta se truyen ngoi cho. You drift further into the streets. And Paris in daylight feels almost too bright. As if the city is trying to scrub away what happened the night before. Market stalls spill over with fruit and flowers. Vendors shouting in cheerful tones. Children chasing one another between carts. Yet if you look closely, tucked behind the respectable chaos, you see the quiet spread of heroin seeping into everyday life. A pharmacist in a tidy white coat leans out of his doorway, beckoning with a smile that feels a little too smooth. On the counter inside, next to jars of lavender and chalk lozenges, lie the little glass packets that promise miracles. They're displayed with the same innocence as peppermints. But you sense the hush around them, the way voices lower, the way hands slip coins across counters quickly. Doctors were the early apostles of heroin, preaching its virtues with the conviction of men convinced science had outsmarted pain itself. Safer than morphine, they said, as if simply repeating it made it true. Housewives carried home packets prescribed for coughs, for nerves, for sleepless children. Imagine the absurdity. A mother spooning out a syrup laced with heroin to calm her little one's cough, believing she was protecting him. It's the kind of story that makes you wince, even as you marvel at how trust in progress can be so easily betrayed. Some historians still debate whether doctors genuinely believed in its harmlessness, or if they simply chose not to look too closely at the growing shadows. You pause by the Seine, the smell of wet stone rising from the embankments. Students linger nearby, their satchels bulging with notebooks and, sometimes, a hidden vial or two. The irony is almost comic. Young men debating politics, revolution, and philosophy over cheap wine. Their gestures grand and their words tumbling out in fiery bursts. While the heroin tucked in their pockets steals the very clarity they worship. Picture one of them pausing mid-rant to take a sniff, then declaring with confidence that Baudelaire himself would approve. You can't help but smirk at the bravado, knowing how quickly brilliance can unravel into ruin. And the cafes, they were the true laboratories of this era. Inside smoky rooms lined with mirrors. Waiters in crisp aprons weave between tables balancing cups of bitter coffee. Absinthe in green-tinged glasses. And quietly, discreetly, small envelopes slid from hand to hand. A singer with painted lips leans against the piano. Her laugh too loud, her eyes a little glassy. You wonder if the audience notices, or if they're too enchanted by the music to care. In Paris, appearance had always mattered more than truth, and heroin slipped neatly into that masquerade. There were even advertisements, posters printed with neat lettering, promising heroin as a cure for melancholy and the common cold. You try not to laugh at the thought. A wonder drug marketed like cough drops. Some were earnest, others sly, but all carried the same undertone. This fruit of science is here to save you. And yet, you can almost hear the city whispering back. Save us from what? The Belle Époque was a time of glitter and shadows, when Paris dazzled the world with art and invention, even as hunger and disease pressed close at its edges. Perhaps heroin felt like a bandage, a way to smother the ache without healing the wound. You lean against a lamppost, watching as a wealthy couple glides past in their carriage. They're laughing, wrapped in velvet and fur, and you catch a glimpse of a slim vial glinting in the gentleman's hand as he slips it back into his pocket. The drug has already crossed boundaries, from the poor to the elite, from the desperate to the fashionable. And that, perhaps, is the most dangerous sign of all. The jokes write themselves. Imagine an etiquette manual, when offered heroin at supper. Do remember to accept with the left hand, never the right. Or a Parisian gossip column. Madame Dupont is positively glowing. Rumor has it her radiance comes courtesy of Bayer's latest remedy. Behind the humor, though, you sense the undercurrent of inevitability, as though the city itself were leaning into the illusion, even while knowing it couldn't last. Some historians still argue whether Paris at this time was naive or complicit. Did people truly not understand the danger? Or did they prefer to look away while the city glittered? Perhaps both. After all, denial is as Parisian as café crème and scandal. As the sun dips lower, throwing long shadows across the boulevards, you realize heroin isn't just a story about medicine gone wrong. It's a story about faith, in science, in progress, in the belief that every problem has a neat solution. And faith, as you know, can be both salvation and curse. The evening settles again, and Paris changes its mask. Gas lamps hiss awake one by one, their yellow halos floating above the boulevards like cautious stars. You wander past cafes where the clink of glasses sharpens into a rhythm, mingling with laughter that feels a little too brittle. Here, heroin slips more boldly into the frame, no longer just in the discreet hands of doctors, but in the shared rituals of nightlife. The city that worships pleasure has found a new sacrament, one measured not in wine poured or absinthe dripped, but in tiny vials passed like secrets. The theaters play their part too. Velvet curtains rise on operettas, comedians, and dancers spinning under chandeliers. Yet in the wings, actors whisper about their miracle cure for stage fright, a pinch of powder to steady nerves before the spotlight burns. You can almost picture a trembling soprano in a saffron dress, clutching her chest, then straightening her shoulders after a discreet dose, her voice soaring higher than ever. Was it talent, or chemistry? Even the critics couldn't tell. though some historians still debate whether entire performances were buoyed by chemistry disguised as confidence. You step into Montmartre, the hill alive with cabarets and song. Painters set up their canvases on street corners, sketching the glow of gaslight on stone, while patrons tuck themselves into smoky corners with their drinks. The crowd is a stew of students, workers, and wandering aristocrats slumming for a thrill. In the laughter and chatter, you notice moments, an idle hand dipping into a pocket, a faint gleam of glass, a sigh that's a little too dreamy. It's as if heroin has become another flavor of Parisian excess. No stranger than absinthe fountains or scandalous dances at the Moulin Rouge. There's a strange humor in it all. Imagine a guidebook. 10 things to do in Paris. 1. Visit the Louvre. 2. Climb the Eiffel Tower. 3. Try the heroin that everyone's whispering about. Or a postcard scrawled by some daring tourist. Wish you were here. The food's great, the wine's better, and the medicine makes me float like a balloon. You chuckle at the thought. But beneath the irony lies something sharper. The city is making entertainment out of a poison, dressing it in sequins and candlelight. Not everyone is fooled, though. In hushed corners of medical journals, warnings begin to appear. Notes about patients who seemed cured, only to return with hollow eyes and trembling hands. A few cautious doctors whisper that the drug might not be so harmless after all. Yet their voices are drowned by the applause of the crowd, the jingling cash registers, and the steady hum of a city too enamored with its own pleasures to pause. By the river, you watch the reflection of lights dance on the water, rippling like laughter that hides a cough. It feels almost prophetic, beauty trembling over darkness, ready to break with the slightest push. Some historians still argue whether Paris was simply blind in these years or if the city, like an addict itself, chose the illusion because it was easier than the truth. You take a deep breath, and the air tastes of smoke, perfume, and something faintly metallic, like coins passed too many times from hand to hand. It is the scent of a city that cannot stop itself, glorious, reckless, and slowly writing tragedy into the margins of its own music. The dawn after indulgence feels different, doesn't it? You walk the Paris streets as the city rubs its eyes. The revelry of the night dissolving into the grey of morning. Shopkeepers lift shutters with heavy arms. Children skip with satchels toward schools. And carriages rattle past puddles left from the night's drizzle. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythms, heroin lingers like a ghost, no longer hidden only in cabarets or clinics but in the quiet corners of respectable homes. Here, the bourgeois salons play host to another kind of performance. Curtains drawn, chandeliers dimmed, and within these rooms of velvet and gilt, conversations flow about politics, art, and the latest gossip. But in a side chamber, someone produces a delicate case, lined in teal silk, holding vials as carefully as jewels. It is whispered as medicine, yet passed as luxury, offered the way one might serve an exotic dessert. You picture a hostess in russet satin, balancing her tray of crystal glasses and murmuring, "Would you care for a taste? Just a touch for the nerves." Guests nod gravely, pretending to be worldly, but their widened pupils betray them. There's a strange comedy in these rituals. Imagine the etiquette manuals of the time, when entertaining. Always provide fresh linens, adequate seating, and if possible, a modest supply of heroin, or the husbands returning late from these gatherings, feigning fatigue while stumbling over their boots, whispering excuses that fool no one. The city has turned a dangerous powder into a parlor trick, another accessory to wealth and refinement. Doctors themselves, some still enchanted, lend the practice an air of legitimacy. A physician in indigo frock coat, spectacles gleaming in lamplight, assures a worried parent that a spoonful of morphine syrup, its cousin, will calm a restless child. Heroin, advertised as purer and less addictive, enters the same discourse, the supposed gentle hand of medicine. Some historians still argue whether the medical profession truly believed in its innocence or chose blindness because the profits and prestige were too dazzling to resist. You pause by the Seine and watch the barges drift under the bridges. Among sacks of flour and barrels of wine, there might be crates marked in code, shipments of alkaloid powders bound for pharmacies and private buyers alike. Paris is no longer just consuming heroin, it is distributing it. Its veins stretching outward like the drug itself. And here's the odd fact: customs officials sometimes waved shipments through without question, assuming that if it looked official enough, it must be fine. Bureaucracy has always been a strange accomplice. Yet cracks in the facade widen. In poorer quarters, whispers spread of young men stumbling out of cafes, their laughter collapsing into vacant stares. A few priests preach sermons against the creeping tide of foreign poisons. Though their congregations, weary of sin lists, half listen before heading back to their routines. You sense the tension rising. The gap between the gilded salons where heroin is a novelty and the streets where its shadow lengthens. You lean against a lamppost as daylight strengthens. The cobblestones slick underfoot. The morning smells of bread and damp stone. Yet there's another scent too, bitter, chemical, faint but insistent. You realize Paris has embraced something it doesn't fully understand. Dressing danger in lace and candlelight. The city smiles, but the smile trembles. And in that trembling, you see the future forming. Though no one here admits it, the laughter of salons and the hush of clinics are two sides of the same coin. And when it flips, both will pay the price. The years creep forward, and with them, the marketplace swells. You find yourself strolling along the boulevards lined with shops, their windows glittering with promises, corsets trimmed in lace, bottles of perfume gleaming like captured sunlight. And behind the counter of certain pharmacies, little packets of powder that carry far more than fragrance. Heroin begins to slip into advertisements. Its name polished and proud, touted as the remedy for nearly everything that could ail a human body. You pause at a newspaper stand, where the bold type of a medical journal reprint shouts about the miracle alkaloid. You trace your finger along the ink and catchphrases that sound almost comical now. Guaranteed relief from coughs. Soothing for the lungs. Ideal for children. Imagine handing a bottle of heroin syrup to a child with a cold and telling them it will help them sleep better. An idea so shocking to modern ears it almost feels like satire. And yet, it was written with all the authority of science. Some historians still debate whether these claims were naive optimism or shrewd marketing wrapped in the cloak of medical certainty. The pharmacies smell of camphor and alcohol. Their shelves neat rows of glass. Behind the counter, An apprentice in saffron waistcoat dutifully fills prescriptions, sliding small envelopes across the wood. A gentleman picks one up with the same air he might buy a box of chocolates for his wife. The normalization is staggering. What once slunk in shadows now gleams openly under gaslight. There's humor here too, absurd enough to make you chuckle. Picture a dinner party where the host boasts, "This new tonic keeps me alert all day," while nodding off mid-sentence. Or a mother handing her child a spoonful, whispering, "This will quiet you," then marveling when the house falls into unnatural silence. If you tilt your head, it almost plays like farce, a comedy of errors where everyone is convinced they are enlightened, while the walls quietly shift around them. But not all laughter hides the truth. Reports begin to emerge, scattered at first, of patients who cannot seem to stop. Doctors puzzle over cases where coughs cured months ago still see patients begging for more refills. Strange dependency, one might write in his notes, perhaps reluctant to admit the obvious. Others insist the fault lies in weak constitutions, rather than the drug itself. A deflection as old as medicine. The debates fill journals. Some voices cautious, others dismissive, while the public listens only to the louder promise of relief. You walk further, past the river markets where vendors hawk fish and flowers. And in the same breath, you overhear whispers about the pharmacy's newest miracle cure. Housewives, dockworkers, even priests. Everyone seems to know someone who has tried it. For a city once fearful of tomatoes, Paris now swallows heroin without a second thought. And still, the paradox sharpens. The city that prides itself on elegance and reason clings to a cure that both soothes and shackles. The boulevards gleam, but in back rooms, some customers return too often, too desperate, their hands trembling as coins clatter onto the counter. You feel it in your chest as you watch the crowd, the strange duality of progress and peril. How easily they can masquerade as one another. The laughter of the market, the chatter of advertisements, the solemn words of physicians, all braided around a powder finer than dust. And as the sun sets over the rooftops, you sense the story darkening. One dose at a time. You move into the hushed corridors of hospitals, their walls tall and whitewashed, though the air carries the faint tang of carbolic acid and damp linens. Parisian doctors, once skeptical, now slip heroin into their daily routines, scribbling prescriptions as though they were notes in a symphony. To you, it feels almost absurd. A drug stronger than morphine, praised as less addictive, given with the same confidence one might hand out peppermints at a cafe. In the wards, you see children coughing, their frail chests rattling with tuberculosis. A nurse in indigo skirts spoons a syrup into one boy's mouth, his small body easing as if released from invisible ropes. Parents clasp their hands in gratitude, whispering prayers of thanks. The irony hangs thick in the air, salvation offered, but at a cost unseen. Some historians still debate whether those early doctors truly believed in its harmlessness or whether they chose to overlook the troubling patterns already sprouting like weeds. By the bedside of soldiers, heroin finds yet another calling. Veterans from colonial campaigns return with shattered nerves and phantom pains, and the city's physicians hand them powders wrapped in parchment, whispering reassurance. The men close their eyes as relief washes through them. some sighing with gratitude, others staring too long at the empty packet once it's gone. The hospitals become places of both healing and quiet bondage. Sanctuaries where pain and pleasure blur until no one can quite tell which is which. The humor, dry as it is, bubbles at the edges. Picture a doctor scribbling notes by lamplight. Patient cured of cough. Now visits daily for no apparent reason. Or imagine a medical lecture where one physician gravely insists, heroin presents no danger of habit, while his colleague in the back row suppresses a smirk. Having seen the same patient 3 times that week, the contradictions pile up like case files left to gather dust. Beyond the wards, the press carries glowing stories of miracle recoveries. Housewives clip articles and pin them to their kitchen boards, eager to remember the name of the latest wonder drug. Yet in quieter voices, you overhear attendants muttering of patients who fade too fast, who grow pale not from illness but from something else entirely. The debate hums just below the surface. Is this medicine? Or is this something darker in disguise? You wander past the pharmacy attached to the hospital, where rows of jars gleam under gaslight. Labels written in delicate script read, heroin hydrochloride, as casually as if they read, chamomile. Behind the counter, an apprentice in russet sleeves measures powder with solemn care. His hand steady, though his eyes flicker toward the door where a line of patients already waits. The routine is clinical, almost sacred, yet beneath it you feel the unease. Like a church bell tolling faintly in the distance. Here in these halls, heroin's double life comes into sharper focus. It is lauded as a cure, whispered as a crutch, defended as a miracle, doubted as a menace. The paradox grows heavier with every dose given and every patient returned. You feel it settle into the stones of the hospital itself, as though the building knows it shelters both relief and ruin. And as you step out into the night, the air cooler now, the gas lamps flickering against cobblestones slick with rain, you can't shake the sense that Paris is walking into a storm. One prescription at a time. The storm you sense at the hospital doors follows you into the pharmacies scattered across Parisian boulevards. Their windows glow warmly in the evening fog, brass scales shining like trophies under gaslight. You step inside one, and the bell above the door chimes. Though the smell hits you first, camphor, dried herbs, and something sweeter, almost cloying, that you realize comes from jars labeled simply, heroin. Here, behind glass counters, heroin moves from a doctor's prescription pad to the everyday hand of the public. The apothecary, in his saffron waistcoat, measures out powders with the precision of a jeweler. Customers lean in eagerly, asking for lozenges for coughs, syrups for nerves, tinctures for sleepless nights. You hear them murmur thanks as they leave, clutching small paper-wrapped parcels as if they hold salvation. It's striking how ordinary it all feels, like buying bread or candles. Yet you can't ignore the way some return too quickly. Too often, voices trembling as they ask for just a little more. Historians still debate whether pharmacists truly failed to notice these patterns, or whether they noticed all too well and chose silence. One strange fact you learn: heroin was marketed not only as safe but as less addictive than morphine. Posters and pamphlets declare it a miracle of modern chemistry. A cleaner, gentler balm. You picture the advertisements. Bold fonts promising relief. Illustrations of smiling mothers spooning syrup into children's mouths. To you, it feels almost like the 20th century version of a toothpaste ad. Except the product happens to be one of the most potent opiates ever crafted. And yes, humor finds its way here too. Imagine a Parisian man joking in a cafe, "Why? My cough is cured so well I keep buying more just to be sure it doesn't come back." Or a pharmacist muttering under his breath, "If everyone's lungs are so healthy, why are my shelves empty every morning?" The contradictions pile higher than the rows of apothecary jars. The shelves themselves tell their own story. Alongside lavender oils and chamomile teas, you see neat rows of brown bottles embossed with Bayer, the German company exporting heroin by the kilo. The labels look reassuringly official. The typography crisp, as if good branding could erase risk. Housewives buy them, workers tuck lozenges into pockets, and children sip them in spoons of syrup. Relief, respectability, and danger come bottled in the same glass. Outside, the demand grows. Pharmacies become hubs of quiet exchange, where respectable citizens and desperate souls stand shoulder to shoulder. You notice how the line at the counter doesn't distinguish between them. How all wear the same polite mask of need. It is a theater of civility. But underneath, something stronger pulls at the strings. Stepping back into the street, you see the city differently now. Every lit pharmacy sign feels like a lighthouse guiding both the weary and the entranced. The boulevards hum with life, but you sense a current beneath the cobblestones. A pulse that beats in rhythm with each spoonful poured, each bottle sold. Paris is not just consuming heroin, it is weaving it into the fabric of daily life. And as the bells of Notre Dame toll in the distance, their solemn notes drifting across the Seine, you can't help but feel that the sound carries a warning. One the city is not quite ready to hear. The air outside cools, the Seine catching shards of moonlight as you walk past shuttered shops. And yet cafes keep glowing like small embers scattered through the night. You step into one, drawn by the murmur of voices and the smell of roasted coffee beans. Here, heroin slips quietly from pharmacies into conversation, becoming less a medical miracle and more a cultural accessory. You overhear students, poets, and painters trading words about it with the same ease they once reserved for absinthe. In a corner, a young poet in an indigo scarf leans dramatically over his notebook, whispering lines about the velvet silence heroin gifts to the soul. You fight the urge to roll your eyes. Somehow, every generation discovers a drug and immediately thinks it invented melancholy. At the next table, a painter gestures wildly with a stained hand, claiming heroin lets him see colors with a purity beyond the spectrum. His friends nod gravely, though you can tell half of them are thinking about how to pay the cafe bill. Historians still debate whether these early bohemian experiments were truly widespread, or if they were magnified later into legend by gossip-hungry critics. The oddest detail? Some early heroin users actually compared it favorably to wine, calling it a modern intoxicant that lacked the clumsiness of alcohol. Imagine trading Bordeaux for a powder in a paper twist. Paris, with its centuries of vineyards and wine cellars, suddenly had a rival intoxicant, one carried in pockets instead of bottles. It's a bit like today's switch from vinyl records to streaming. The ritual changed, but the craving stayed the same. You can't help but smirk at the scene. A waiter rolls his eyes as yet another patron asks for water. Please, only water, while clearly humming with something stronger than caffeine. A satirical column you recall once quipped, "The only art heroin has improved is the art of falling asleep in cafes." The city, it seems, knows how to mock itself even as it stumbles. Still, beneath the jokes, something serious stirs. Paris's bohemian quarters had long been laboratories of indulgence, absinthe, hashish, opium pipes smuggled from the east. Heroin was simply the newest arrival, slipping into that familiar rotation. But unlike absinthe's green hallucinations or opium's dream-laden haze, heroin wrapped its users in silence, in a heavy quiet that drew them inward. For artists, that quiet could feel like inspiration or oblivion. You notice the shift in tone as conversations stretch late into the night. Some speak of heroin as liberation, a break from the heavy burden of modern life. Others warn, in low voices, of friends who no longer show up to readings or who sleep through rehearsals. Paris is learning, one cafe at a time, that heroin doesn't just invite you to dream, it sometimes forgets to let you wake. And so, as you step back out onto the cobbled street, the laughter and smoke trailing behind you, you realize the city is entering a new stage. No longer confined to jars and prescriptions. Heroin is now woven into the rhythm of talk, art, and aspiration. You sense the Seine flowing beside you like a mirror, carrying both reflections of beauty and shadows of something darker. The next morning comes with the clang of tram bells and the smell of coal smoke drifting through narrow Parisian streets. Sunlight spills across market stalls. But as you wander toward the pharmacy district, you realize heroin is no longer just a whispered indulgence in cafes, it is becoming a business. Behind polished windows, chemists in white coats stack glass bottles and paper packets with a precision that feels almost holy. They speak in low, authoritative tones, as though measuring powders were a kind of priestly ritual. You pause near one counter where a shopgirl in a teal dress discreetly slips a small envelope to a nervous young man. His hands tremble, not from the exchange itself but from the way he glances at the door every few seconds. As if the gendarmes might burst in at any moment. Yet the law, for now, remains strangely quiet. Historians still debate whether authorities truly overlooked these transactions out of ignorance, corruption, or simple faith in the respectability of pharmacies. Whatever the reason, heroin enjoyed a strange grace period, legal enough to be bought, illicit enough to feel thrilling. There's an odd, almost comic dissonance in the scene. On one shelf sits licorice root for coughs. On another lavender oil for sleepless nights. And right between them, little white packets of heroin, sold with the same gravity as aspirin. It's like walking into a modern supermarket and finding wellness shots next to batteries, mundane convenience disguising dangerous possibility. One chemist, his russet waistcoat dusted with flowery residue, boasts to a customer that heroin is safer than morphine. A cleaner flame, as he puts it. You watch the customer nod eagerly, though his eyes betray a mix of curiosity and dread. Another pharmacist warns that only a touch should be taken, comparing it to a spice that could overwhelm the stew. Yet you can sense how easily advice slips into excuse. The humor lingers in the contradictions. You overhear a well-dressed matron announcing to her friend that heroin syrup has cured her cough and improved her embroidery speed. "I finished 3 tablecloths in a week," she beams. As though hyper-productivity were the mark of health. A satirical pamphlet even joked, "Heroin makes the French stitch faster, speak faster, and regret faster." Paris, as usual, found room for wit even in its vices. But under the laughter, a shadow grows. You hear whispers of pharmacies that open late at night, selling to actors stumbling out of theaters and students who swear it helps them cram Latin declensions. Some doctors begin to murmur warnings in journals, cautioning that what seemed a tonic may in fact chain its users. Yet others dismiss the fears, insisting heroin is simply modernity in powdered form. As you step back into the busy street, the rhythm of horse hooves and distant church bells reminds you that Paris itself is shifting. This is no longer just the city of absinthe and opium dens. It is becoming a marketplace of heroin. Sold with polite smiles, wrapped in paper, handed across counters like sweets. And you can't help but sense that beneath the surface of commerce, a quiet dependency is already spreading, like cracks beneath fresh plaster. The afternoon wears on, and the city hums with the metallic rattle of carriages and the chatter of café terraces. You wander deeper into the Quartier Latin, where students with ink-stained fingers and restless eyes argue about philosophy and revolution. Yet behind their rhetoric lies another secret. Heroin has begun to slip into their notebooks and nights. Some swear it sharpens their thoughts, quickens their pace through dense volumes of Latin and Greek. Others murmur that it steadies nerves before debates, a kind of liquid courage in powdered form. You watch a small circle of students gathered in a cramped room lit by a single oil lamp. Books spill off shelves, and the air smells of coffee, sweat, and something sharper, the bitter tang of heroin dissolved in wine. They pass the glass like a communion chalice, each sip followed by a long exhale, their voices softening into laughter. One young man recites lines from Baudelaire, his cadence fluid, his cheeks glowing as if lit from within. Another scribbles feverishly in the margins of a notebook, convinced he has just solved the problem of existence. Historians still debate whether such moments truly bore fruit in literature or whether the brilliance faded with the fog of morning. The humor is hard to ignore. You picture a student declaring, "At last, I've discovered the secret of human destiny," only to pass out face first into his dictionary. Or the weary professor trying to grade essays that swing wildly between genius and gibberish, muttering, "This must be the work of heroin, or very bad coffee." But alongside the comedy, a darker thread coils. You notice how quickly the laughter turns to silence, how the brightness of their eyes flickers into something hollow. A young woman in an indigo scarf sits apart, staring at her ink-stained fingers as though they belonged to someone else. When she finally speaks, her voice trembles. It feels like fire in the blood, and then nothing at all. The others shift uncomfortably, then pour her another glass, as if drowning the unease with more of the same. Out in the streets, pamphlets circulate, some praising the wonders of modern science, others warning of moral decay. Cartoons depict students collapsing at their desks, their quills slipping into puddles of ink. Yet curiosity outpaces caution. Heroin's reputation as a cleaner alternative to opium makes it attractive to minds eager for novelty. And Paris, ever hungry for the next intellectual thrill, embraces it with both arms. As you drift away from the lamplit room, you can't shake the echo of their laughter, brittle at the edges, as though it might shatter with the next breath. Parisian youth, once drunk on ideas alone, are now experimenting with something stronger. And you sense the city is playing host to a dangerous performance where every curtain call leaves the actors weaker. The gas lamps flicker awake as evening settles over Paris, their glow stretching across wet cobblestones like molten gold. You drift toward the boulevards, where the hum of the city grows sharper, louder, and a little more desperate. Here, heroin finds its stage not in private salons or smoky student rooms, but in the glittering night life, the cabarets, the music halls, the places where laughter is loud enough to drown out the whispers of danger. You slip inside one of these halls, where a singer in a teal dress leans against the piano, her voice smoky with longing. At the back tables, men in russet coats sip absinthe while quietly passing small envelopes beneath the candlelight. You notice how the performers' eyes glisten unnaturally, their movements just a fraction too fluid, like marionettes whose strings have been loosened. The audience claps, enchanted, never asking what fuels the show. There's a strange humor here too. Imagine a comedian who, midway through his set, forgets the punchline but delivers it anyway with such conviction that the crowd roars with laughter. Or a pianist who pounds the same chord again and again, swearing it's the heartbeat of the universe. Historians still debate whether heroin truly influenced Parisian art or if the connection was exaggerated, woven into myths later to make the decadence seem more romantic than it really was. Outside, posters peel from the walls advertising exotic nights, promising visions and dreams sold alongside cheap wine. Some patrons chase both in equal measure, convinced that inspiration hides in the bottom of a glass or at the end of a syringe. You picture them bragging, "Tonight I glimpsed eternity," while stumbling into a gutter. Eternity reduced to a puddle and a headache. And yet, beneath the absurdity, something haunting unfolds. A young dancer collapses in the wings, her breath shallow, her fellow performers carrying her away as if it were part of the act. A poet in a corner scribbles frantically, his words looping back on themselves until the page is covered in circles. A waiter mutters to himself, "Another one gone," as though the spectacle is as routine as spilled champagne. The boulevards outside buzz with carriages and laughter. But you feel the unease pressing in. Heroin is no longer confined to hidden rooms. It's seeping into the veins of public life, turning entertainment into ritual, performance into peril. Paris, the city of light, is casting longer and longer shadows. And you sense that even the applause at the end of each show is starting to sound hollow. The night grows quieter as you wander away from the cabarets. And soon the hum of laughter gives way to something heavier. You drift through narrow side streets, where shutters hang half open and voices echo from inside crowded apartments. This is the quieter face of the heroin problem, not gilded with chandeliers or velvet curtains, but tucked into the private corners of homes where respectability struggles to keep its balance. Behind one window, you glimpse a bourgeois family gathered for dinner, their silverware clinking in measured rhythm. The father, in a saffron waistcoat, keeps his back straight, his mustache stiff, while at his side his wife avoids his eyes, staring instead at the untouched roast. Their son excuses himself early, slipping away with a pale face and a quick step. You follow him in imagination as he disappears into a small study, where a carefully locked drawer holds tiny packets of powder. In these houses, heroin was not scandal but secret, folded into the fabric of domestic life like an extra crease in a curtain. There's a humor in the absurdity. Picture a matron boasting about her rose garden at tea, all while hiding the fact that her daughter spends afternoons staring at the wallpaper with pinprick pupils. Or the uncle who insists on lecturing about moderation in drink while nodding off into his dessert. Historians still debate whether middle-class families were genuinely oblivious to heroin use within their walls, or if silence itself became the strategy. Pretend not to notice. And perhaps it won't stain the family name. The furniture tells its own story. Plush chairs sag as if they, too, are exhausted. A piano gathers dust because the children no longer practice, their fingers trembling too much to press the keys. Even the paintings on the walls, landscapes of green hills and bright skies, seem out of step with the atmosphere, as though mocking the faded energy in the room. And outside, neighbors gossip. You hear the hiss of whispers. Did you see Madame's son? So thin, so pale. But the next moment, voices shift to safer subjects: fashion, politics, the weather. No one dares point directly at the shadow creeping across their tidy facades. In a way, it's like watching a crack form in fine porcelain, tiny at first, almost invisible, but already threatening the whole structure. For you, the most striking thing isn't the scandal or the secrecy, but the stillness that heroin imposes on these respectable rooms. A family dinner table, meant for laughter and debate, becomes a silent stage where forks scrape and words dry up. In the quiet, the city's heartbeat slows, and you sense that Paris's elegance is becoming a mask, stretched too thin to hide the truths lurking beneath. The city changes its rhythm as dawn edges closer. You step out of those stifled parlors and into the avenues where carriages rattle and street sweepers drag their brooms along cobblestones still wet from the night. Paris at the turn of the century loves spectacle. But it also loves silence, and in the mornings, both seem to merge. The heroin problem doesn't disappear with daylight. It merely wears a tidier suit. In a smoky cafe near the Boulevard Saint-Germain, you notice a cluster of men bent over newspapers, their cups of black coffee steaming in the chill. Their conversation dances around finance, politics, colonial adventures, but never quite touches the subject of the powders slipping quietly into Parisian veins. Yet their trembling hands and the way they pause too long between sips betray them. One man, with an indigo cravat tied too tightly, pulls from his pocket a vial no bigger than a thumb, tapping it gently against the table before tucking it away again. Nobody comments. It's like spotting a colleague scrolling their phone under the table in a meeting, you all know. But the rules of politeness forbid acknowledgement. There's humor in the denial. Imagine these men scribbling furious notes about tariffs while their pupils widen like lanterns. Or picture the waiter sighing as he clears cups that have barely been touched, muttering under his breath that Monsieur pays more attention to his powders than his pastries. Historians still debate whether such morning cafes were truly centers of discreet drug use or whether the occasional sighting simply loomed larger in later memory, magnified by scandal and gossip. Step outside again and you catch the rhythm of the city waking, tram bells clanging, milk carts rolling, the smell of fresh bread drifting from bakeries. But woven into this ordinary soundtrack is a quieter, stranger note: the careful steps of those who chase relief before breakfast. A young woman in a teal shawl slips through an alley, clutching her handbag a little too tightly, while a clerk in a russet jacket vanishes into a side door that smells faintly of chemicals. The contrast is striking. Paris at its most luminous, with light spilling across Haussmann's boulevards, and yet Paris at its most shadowed, with lives narrowing into the ritual of a needle or a vial. The city manages to hold both truths at once: polished marble and hidden melancholy, like a chandelier that sparkles even as its chain creaks under the weight. And you keep walking, the sounds of morning folding over you like a blanket, carts, footsteps, laughter, all mingling with the hush of secrets that few dare name. This is a city in motion, but also a city leaning ever so slightly toward stillness, lulled by the quiet pull of a drug too easy to reach, too easy to hide. Paris in daylight feels theatrical. But the theaters themselves, those ornate halls lined with velvet seats and gilded balconies, hold another layer of the heroine story. You slip into one of them, brushing past posters that promise comedy and tragedy, all while backstage a different drama unfolds. Actors pace nervously, voices trembling not only from stage fright but from the hush of withdrawal, or the heavy calm that follows a quiet dose. Imagine a soprano in a saffron gown, her voice meant to soar toward the rafters, yet her hands tremble as she grips the curtain edge. A stagehand in a teal vest mutters encouragement, but even he has seen too many performers swaying a little too dreamily under the gaslight. The audience, eager and glittering, notices nothing. They clap at the right moments, laugh at jokes, lean forward at climaxes, convinced the passion they witness is merely art. But you can see the undertow, the way the music lingers too long, the way an actor forgets a line, the way silence suddenly feels like confession. There's humor here too, of course. Picture a comic actor delivering a witty monologue. His timing's so slow it's like he's buffering in real life. Or imagine the orchestra fiddler nodding off mid-performance, bows sliding across strings like a cat walking on a piano. The critics in the front row scribble furiously, unsure whether to call it avant-garde or simply catastrophic. Historians still debate whether the drug was truly rampant among performers or whether scandal magnified isolated cases into legend. Yet the connection makes sense. Theater has always been about escape, into fantasy, into roles, into someone else's words, and heroin offered a parallel stage, one without applause, where reality blurred into a haze that seemed safer than the world outside. For some actors, the line between performance and private life collapsed entirely, their nightly curtain calls shadowed by quiet mornings of despair. You settle into a plush velvet seat, watching the chandeliers tremble faintly with every note. The show unfolds as it always does, costumes dazzling, words rehearsed, but you know now there's another script running underneath. Invisible to most but written into every pause, every missed beat, And when the curtain falls and applause erupts, it sounds just a little too much like relief. You drift from the theater into the quiet halls of a hospital. The marble echoing beneath your steps. The smell of antiseptic mingling with coal smoke wafting through the windows. This is Paris in the early 20th century, where doctors in indigo coats debate in hushed voices over patients whose symptoms seem to slide between the physical and the invisible. Heroin, once hailed as a miracle cure, is already leaving its mark on the wards. Imagine a young doctor, fresh from his studies, holding a syringe with the same reverence a knight might hold a sword. He believes he's saving lives, calming coughs, soothing pain, offering a balm where opium had failed. But you notice his brow furrow as a patient, once lively, grows pale and listless with each visit. The medical journals of the time praised heroin's power. And yet behind the praise lurked troubling footnotes. Patients developed cravings, their doses creeping upward, and doctors whispered about a strange dependence that felt uncomfortably familiar. There's a touch of absurdity too. Picture a senior physician lecturing his students. Heroin is safer than morphine, no risk at all. Meanwhile, half the class is suppressing laughter because the ward downstairs tells another story entirely. Or imagine the apothecary's assistant rolling his eyes as he prepares yet another, non-addictive prescription. Muttering, "Sure. And absinthe is just fancy grape juice." Historians still debate whether the early warnings were ignored out of ignorance or out of sheer stubborn faith in modern science's brilliance. In one ward, you see patients wrapped in blankets, coughing weakly, their lungs rattling in rhythm with the ticking of the wall clock. In another, a man stares at the ceiling, his hands twitching as though reaching for something unseen. The nurses, dressed in teal aprons, move briskly, their voices soothing, but their eyes betray unease. They've seen too many recoveries turn into new afflictions. You lean against the cold wall, the gas lamps flickering, and realize the hospital itself is a stage of contradictions, a place of healing that may also be spreading harm. A sanctuary that sometimes becomes a trap. Outside, Paris bustles with optimism, but in these corridors the truth grows harder to ignore. The miracle drug is showing its cracks, though few are ready to admit it. You step out from the hushed corridors of the hospital and find yourself drifting into the elegant salons of Paris, where the chandeliers sparkle like captive stars and laughter bubbles beneath the haze of cigarette smoke. Here, heroin no longer wears the white coat of medicine. It drapes itself in velvet and whispers through the voices of poets, painters, and dreamers. The bohemian crowd embraces it not as a treatment but as an inspiration. A muse poured into a tiny vial. You picture the scene. Artists in saffron waistcoats and indigo shawls lounging on divans. Their words sliding from witty banter into half-formed verses about love, death, and the thrill of dissolving into nothingness. Someone strikes a piano chord too loudly, and the group erupts into laughter, while in the corner a painter dabs crimson onto a canvas, muttering that the color itself hums when the dose takes hold. The absurdity hangs in the air. Here is a substance that steals focus. Yet these dreamers insist it opens the gates to genius. There's comedy in the contradictions. Imagine a poet clutching his notebook, raving about the clarity heroin gives him. only to smear ink across the page because his hand won't stop shaking. Or a hostess, sighing dramatically. Yes, it makes one terribly profound, before promptly falling asleep into her teacup. Historians still debate whether heroin truly influenced the art of that era or whether its presence was simply tangled into the myth of the starving, suffering genius. And yet, amid the satire, something darker lingers. You hear the coughing of a singer who once dazzled crowds but now struggles to hold a note. You see the hollow cheeks of a playwright whose pen scratches slower with each passing month. Paris's cafes glow with brilliance. Yes, but in their back rooms shadows pool thicker. And the line between inspiration and ruin grows perilously thin. You glance at the grand mirrors, catching your reflection warped among the glittering glass, and realize you're standing in a place where art and addiction waltz together. The dance is dazzling, but you know the music can't last forever. You slip from the candlelit salons into the damp air of a Paris alleyway, the cobblestones glistening under a thin drizzle. The glamour fades here, replaced by the shuffle of weary footsteps and the smell of coal smoke mixing with sewage. Heroin has left the velvet parlors and descended into the working-class neighborhoods, where desperation wears no silk gloves. You see a factory worker in a russet jacket counting coins in his palm, squinting at the faint promise of relief sold in paper packets. A laundress, hands cracked from soap, trades her wages for a vial, her breath hitching as if she knows both the comfort and the curse it carries. The drug that once paraded as medicine and muse now whispers to the poor with a crueler honesty. Not brilliance, not healing, just escape. The contrast is almost comic in its cruelty. Picture a philosopher in a cafe rhapsodizing about transcendent consciousness, while a few blocks away, a laborer mutters, "It just makes the pain in my back vanish for a while." Two worlds, one substance. Like comparing a luxury perfume ad to the air freshener in a public latrine. Historians still debate whether heroin spread into poorer districts was deliberate exploitation by sellers or simply the inevitable trickle-down of a fashionable drug. As you wander, you catch snippets of street music, an accordion wheezing out a tune that should be cheerful but sounds tired. The crowd gathering isn't applauding, they're bartering, glancing nervously at shadows, watching for the gendarme. The atmosphere feels sticky, like a stage after the actors have left but the curtains won't quite close. You pause beneath a sputtering lamp, listening to the rain tap like quiet applause. The story has shifted. Heroin is no longer a scandal of the elite or a curiosity of poets. It is becoming something broader, heavier, a daily burden for those who never asked for muses. Only mercy. You drift further into the city's underbelly, where the night no longer feels romantic but damp, endless, and crowded with secrets. The Seine glides silently nearby, swollen and murky, reflecting the gas lamps as though the river itself is trying to keep watch. Heroin now threads through Paris's criminal networks, shifting from whispered indulgence to calculated commerce. You imagine a smoky backroom behind a shuttered café, a teal waistcoat hanging loose on a man who is more broker than dreamer. Coins and small packets exchange hands across the table, the air thick with suspicion. No one raises a toast here, only eyebrows. The stuff once prescribed by doctors is now hustled by men who speak in half-sentences and clink knives against wine bottles to emphasize their points. It feels like watching a saint's relic being pawned off at a flea market. And humor, dark as it is, finds its way in. Picture a self-styled kingpin rehearsing grand speeches about honor and loyalty, only to be interrupted by his mother knocking from upstairs. "Dinner's ready, Henri," or a thief slipping packets into his boots, only to be chased down the alley by a stray dog with a taste for paper wrapping. Even in the shadows, absurdity never quite dies. Historians still debate how organized these networks truly were, whether Parisian gangs orchestrated a coherent trade or if it was more a chaotic swarm of opportunists. Some argue it foreshadowed the elaborate syndicates of later decades, while others suggest it was more like street theater, messy and improvised, with a rotating cast. You linger at the edge of this imagined gathering, the smell of damp wood and cheap tobacco heavy in the air. Each deal here is more than just money changing hands. It's another stitch in a growing tapestry of dependence and control. The laughter is nervous, the eyes darting, and the shadows seem to lean closer, as though listening too. You wander onward into the glittering salons, where the world above pretends not to notice the quiet commerce unfolding below. Here, heroin wears a new mask, one powdered with sophistication and disguised as fashionable curiosity. Picture a drawing room draped in russet velvet and saffron silk, chandeliers dripping soft light over guests who sip wine and debate art movements as though they themselves are immortal. Yet tucked between discussions of Cézanne and Wagner, someone passes around a tiny vial, its contents praised with the same breathless admiration once reserved for imported perfumes. You hear the giggles, high, brittle, and too quick, as a woman in a teal gown leans back, her fan fluttering like anxious wings. The men, stiff in indigo coats, nod as though they are connoisseurs of something noble. It feels like a parody of sophistication, a masquerade where the fruit on the table is wax and the laughter is rehearsed. And yet, beneath the gold trim, there's a genuine hunger. Not for art or philosophy, but for oblivion softened by velvet. Humor, sly and bitter, slinks into the scene. Imagine a poet reciting verses about the transcendence of the human soul, only to topple backward onto a chaise after one too many experimental doses. Or a hostess whispering, "Of course it's medicinal," as though her salon were a clinic rather than a stage for gossip and indulgence. Somewhere, a servant rolls their eyes, muttering, "Medicinal? More like mischief in powdered form." Historians still debate whether these gatherings truly normalized heroin use among the bourgeoisie or whether they were fringe curiosities, remembered only because of the scandalous memoirs left behind. Some suggest Parisian elites flirted with danger the way they flirted with each other, half in jest, half in desperate earnest. You picture yourself at the edge of the room, candlelight dancing on mirrors, the faint perfume of lilies trying in vain to disguise the sharper tang of chemicals. This isn't the seedy alley anymore, but the contrast is sharper than ever. The same substance moving like a chameleon between worlds. Admired as a muse upstairs and sold as a survival downstairs. Both versions glitter, both rot. You drift further, leaving the salons behind, and the walls grow darker, the air heavier, Paris by night is no longer gilded. Here the streets huddle under dim gaslight. Their shadows long, their silence brittle. You can almost hear your own footsteps echo as you pass shuttered bakeries and shuttered dreams. Until the alleys spit you out into the quarters where heroin has sunk its deepest claws. These are not the salons with velvet curtains or the hospitals with polished brass instruments. These are cramped boarding houses where mattresses sag like broken promises. And whispers coiled tighter than smoke. A boy barely 20 sits hunched by a cracked window. The syringe in his hand gleaming faintly as though it were a priest's chalice. He winces, then sighs, and his breath rattles out like a confession he can't finish. Around him, others slump, eyes glassy, caught somewhere between waking and vanishing. There's a dark humor in the way life here imitates theater. Imagine a man standing dramatically on a wooden crate, declaring, "Tomorrow I quit forever," only to stumble off the stage minutes later. Chasing the next dose. Or picture a woman laughing with all her teeth showing, insisting she's never felt better, while her purse has already been emptied by the drug she praises. It's grotesque, yes, but also achingly human, like a play everyone knows will end badly. Yet they keep buying tickets. Historians still debate whether these neighborhoods were truly overrun or whether the stories grew exaggerated in moralizing newspapers desperate for circulation. What is certain is that heroin left marks not easily erased, on faces, on families, on records hidden in dusty police archives. Some describe these districts as laboratories of despair. Others as simple extensions of poverty dressed in chemical disguise. You walk further down the cobbles. The smell of damp stone mixing with the metallic bite of night air. A lamplighter passes, his pole raised like a tired spear. And for a moment the flicker of flame makes the alleys look almost holy. But the sanctity lasts seconds. You hear a cough behind you. A door slam, the faint sound of someone praying or cursing, it's hard to tell which. And as you turn away, you realize this, too, was Paris. A city balancing spectacle and suffering on the same knife's edge. The cobblestones fade beneath your steps. And you find yourself drawn toward a district where lights never quite go out. Cabarets and cafes humming with chatter. Smoke curling from doors like mischievous spirits. Here, the heroin story takes on a different shape. Less about shadowy alleys and more about polished boots, sparkling dresses, and music that tries to drown out the silence of unease. Inside these venues, you see entertainers perched like exotic birds. Feathers shimmering under candlelit chandeliers. A violin hums, a piano jangles, and laughter erupts in bursts, yet beneath the merriment, something more sinister glows. Behind velvet curtains, performers slip away for a quick taste of oblivion. A needle's prick hidden beneath lace gloves. Some said heroin granted them courage, a steadier hand, or simply relief from exhaustion. But you can't help picturing a comedian rehearsing a joke about life's absurdities while his body quietly collapses from the inside. One cabaret owner is rumored to keep his strongest singers supplied, claiming it preserved their silvery voices. Historians still debate whether this was exploitation, misguided care, or just another business decision in a city that commodified everything, even human fragility. And tucked in journals of the time are strange, almost tender notes. a dancer sketching little stars next to her mentions of heroin. As if it were a lover who brought her both comfort and ruin. The irony grows thick here. Imagine a drunk aristocrat loudly praising Paris as the capital of elegance, only to pass out at a table sticky with spilled absinthe, while in the back room a girl no older than 16 slips into a chemical sleep. Or a critic writing furious essays about immorality in art, while secretly using the same drug he condemns before setting off to his next soirée. You pause at the threshold, letting the music wash over you, a strange mixture of joy and despair tangled in each note. It feels as though the city is singing to itself, too aware of the cracks beneath its gilded mask yet unwilling to stop the show. And as the piano plays on, you realize heroin here wasn't just an escape, it was woven into the very rhythm of performance. Applause covering what silence could not bear. You drift away from the bright lights of cabaret stages and into quieter chambers where words, not music, carry the weight of Paris. Writers, poets, and painters gathered here in smoke-filled salons. Voices low, sentences curling like tendrils of incense. For them, heroin was not just a narcotic but, in their minds at least, a key to unlock hidden corridors of thought. The early 20th century Parisian literary scene was already notorious for chasing intensity, whether through absinthe, hashish, or endless cups of bitter coffee, and heroin slipped neatly into that repertoire of restless minds. You picture a poet leaning over his notebook, ink smudged on his cuff, whispering to himself about visions no one else could see. His friends nod, half envious, half concerned, each secretly wondering if the muse is worth the decay. Some believed heroin sharpened their insight, gifting them fragments of brilliance like sparks in the dark. Others sank into long silences, staring at the ceiling while their pens dried, convinced they were geniuses while producing nothing at all. Historians still debate whether these drugs truly shaped the literature we now revere or if the stories of inspiration were just another layer of romantic myth. There's a humor here too, dark but undeniable. Imagine a philosopher declaring that heroin offered him profound access to the eternal truths, only to forget his own train of thought halfway through a sentence. Or an avant-garde painter swearing the drug revealed the colors of infinity, then accidentally spilling his palette and insisting the mess was intentional art. The salons buzzed with this blend of seriousness and farce, each figure convinced they were walking a tightrope over the abyss of modernity. The irony is that while these intellectuals sought transcendence, many of them ended up trapped in the same cycle as the cabaret dancers or the street addicts they pitied from afar. Fame didn't shield them. Manuscripts remained unfinished, canvases abandoned, letters filled with apologies that repeated until the end. And yet, out of this chaos, Parisian culture inched forward: modernism, surrealism, a willingness to strip life bare of its old pretenses. Perhaps heroin didn't inspire that shift, but it mirrored it, embodying both the daring and the desperation of a city in flux. You sit in the corner of one of these imagined salons, listening to laughter break into coughing fits, watching pages crumple, wine glasses clink, and needles vanish into pockets as quickly as they appeared. It feels intimate, almost conspiratorial, as though you've stumbled into the engine room of Paris's artistic soul, beautiful, tragic, and just a little absurd. You move now from salons to the broad marble steps of government buildings, where debates crackle as fiercely as the café arguments but with far heavier stakes. Parisian authorities could not ignore the creeping shadow of heroin any longer. By the early 20th century, cases of addiction and collapse had become impossible to dismiss as eccentricities of bohemians. Politicians shuffled papers, police whispered of hidden dens, and physicians disagreed loudly about whether heroin was a miracle drug or a menace in disguise. You picture a crowded parliamentary chamber, the air stifling with cigar smoke, one official insisting heroin could ease suffering in hospitals while another thundered that it was unraveling the moral fabric of society. Historians still debate whether these arguments were driven by genuine concern for public health or by political theater designed to win applause. In truth, it was probably both, because even then, nothing earned headlines faster than a drug panic. The irony of it all is deliciously absurd. Imagine a politician solemnly declaring, "Heroin is corrupting the youth of Paris," only to adjourn for lunch and quietly stir a spoonful of absinthe into his coffee. Or a health minister praising strict new laws, then admitting he hadn't actually read the regulations because they gave him a headache. You can almost hear the groans of clerks tasked with rewriting the same proposals over and over. All while heroin slipped quietly through the streets just a few blocks away. But the efforts weren't entirely empty. By the 1920s, France began tightening controls, restricting sales, and tasking police with raids on pharmacies accused of over-dispensing. Pamphlets warned mothers to guard their households, while posters showed grim images of wasted youth meant to frighten the public. Some measures stuck, others fell flat, and the black market laughed its way into deeper alleys. The government, like a frustrated gardener pulling weeds, found that the roots only spread faster underground. And still, Paris continued to shine on the surface, its boulevards glittering, its art world blossoming, even as officials battled a hidden crisis. You can almost see the city as a stage set, the facades grand and gleaming. But behind the painted wood, supports sagging with strain, it's in these contradictions that Paris lived and breathed, where law and life rarely matched. And where heroin carved its quiet niche despite the speeches and signatures meant to stop it. The story winds now into its last stretches, the lights of Paris dimming as if the city itself were finally exhaling after decades of contradiction. You've walked through the parlors and pharmacies, the garrets and government halls, and now you arrive at the threshold where memory softens into reflection. The heroin that once arrived in glass vials with polite labels has etched itself into the marrow of Paris, leaving behind both scandal and silence. You imagine a twilight boulevard, the glow of gas lamps flickering against stone, carriages rolling slowly as if the horses themselves are tired of carrying secrets. The air smells of wet cobblestone, a drizzle cooling the heat of the day, and somewhere a violin plays from a distant window. The city is older, wearier, yet still impossibly alive. And within its bloodstream lingers the echo of heroin, first hailed as medicine, then whispered as poison, then fought as menace. Historians still debate whether the Parisian experience was unique or just part of a larger global drift. Another city caught in the same tide. Some argue that France's medical enthusiasm gave heroin a broader legitimacy than elsewhere, while others insist it was the city's reputation for decadence that magnified its infamy. Both may be true, and perhaps that is Paris's legacy, to magnify whatever it touches. To turn even a powder into poetry and peril at once. You trace back through the absurdities, doctors prescribing heroin for coughs as casually as we swallow aspirin today. Pharmacists stacking jars like trophies. Artists joking about liquid inspiration that dulled their very hands. You remember the police raids, the parliamentary debates, the way ordinary families whispered warnings behind closed shutters. And, like a stage curtain falling, you see how heroin slipped from being an object of curiosity to one of fear. Then to a lesson carved into the city's skin. Now the rhythm slows, your breath sinking with the steady hum of the night. The images blur, no longer sharp alleys or chandeliers, but watercolor washes of red, gray, and gold. The laughter of cafes drifts into silence. The footsteps of policemen fade into echoes. And even the vials on apothecary shelves dissolve into soft shadows. The story no longer demands your attention, it simply rocks you gently, like a cradle in the dark. And in this hush, you realize the tale of heroin in Paris was never only about the drug. It was about the people, their fears, their ambitions, their contradictions, a mirror, round and bitter-sweet, showing how societies stumble and recover, how they search for order in chaos. You lie back, feeling the weight of history soften into the weight of blankets. Your eyelids heavy, your thoughts drifting like smoke curling up to vanish in the night. So let the voices grow faint. Let the lamps fade into stars. Let the streets of Paris recede until only the rhythm of your own breath remains. The tale is finished. The city rests. And so should you. End of script. Sweet dreams.